Hey folks, we're going to get to the episode in just a minute. Just wanted to acknowledge what a tough time this is for all of us. We've all been asked to make sacrifices for the common good, and for some of us, the sacrifices are just extraordinary. At its best, Max Fun Drive is a demonstration of what we can do when we come together, and that's worth celebrating right now. We wanted to take this opportunity to come together as a community of tens of thousands of people who rely on each other to make some magical stuff happen in the world.
Joining Max Fun is quick and easy. All you have to do is visit MaximumFun.org/join, and you'll see all the different levels and the thank you gifts that we offer with each. You'll get all the great bonus content, which is now actually a pretty large library, at just $5 per month. At $10 per month, you get to choose a cool enamel pin from your favorite show, and you'll have the option to purchase others with proceeds from additional pins going to charity. At $20 a month, you get the Max Fun Custom Game Pack with Max Fun dice in a velvet bag with the Rocket logo, and a deck of custom Max Fun playing cards with podcast-inspired designs. Check out all of this and more at MaximumFun.org/join, and don't forget to check the little box that says, "We got this." That's how they know that you're supporting our show. And now, without further ado, please enjoy this episode of We Got This with Mark and Hal.
That's my line.
Oh, sorry. You want to say it?
No. I'm glad you said it. It needed to be said.
It did.
Hello, I'm Hal Lublin.
And I'm Mark Gagliardi.
Since the dawn of humanity, one issue has gone unsettled. With the fate of the world in the balance, we're here to settle, once and for all, Best Beatles Album.
That's right. Don't worry, everyone. We got this.
Podcast should have a theme song. Podcast should not have a theme song. Yes, they should. No, they shouldn't. They sound good. Yeah, but people are just going to skip past it. You know what? You're right. We got this.
Hey, Hal.
Yeah.
Look out the window. Here comes the sun. Little
Wow, I actually looked to
you
my
actually
left
did
for
look.
that.
I know we're doing this.
For that.
Visually as well as audio
Just
on
trusting
Zoom.
me.
Who was that?
Sorry, I forgot that they were doing a show.
Well, that's our guest, the wonderful Molly Lewis.
What's up, Molly?
I know how to make an entrance.
Very, very quietly, like you're like the "if you build it, he will come" voice. That's how you make an entrance.
Is this not one of those ASMR podcasts? Was I not supposed to mumble?
Yeah.
Would you mind crinkling a bag during this whole thing?
What's that?
Perfect. I'm just going to rub this blush brush all over my mic through the whole recording session. Which would not surprise me if that is something that one of the Beatles did in one of their later sessions where they were like, "This sounds like it could be a musical instrument."
Oh, the Beatles? I love the Beatles.
Wait. Oh, yeah. You know what we should do? We should talk about the Beatles.
I mean, it's the only way to appease Ethan Jones from Facebook, who asked this.
Thank you, Ethan Jones, for the topic. This has been a fun dive for me for the past week because I've always been a Beatles fan as a pedestrian fan of the Beatles, but to really dive into all of these albums this week was a lot of fun. Molly, you say I'm a Beatles fan. Are you a big Beatles fan, in fact?
Yeah, I've been listening to the Beatles since I was 5, I think. Because I started with the Red Album and Anthology 3 and worked my way towards the center.
Wow.
Just like a little corn cob music.
Anthology 3, was that all of just them counting off 1, 2, 3, 4 at the beginning of a track?
Yeah, it was a lot of them forgetting how to play guitar and sing at the same time. And then just George being pensive on guitar by himself, and then John and Paul around.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that Beatles anthology, by the time they got to the later Beatles anthologies, I was like, guys, there's a reason these did not make the cut.
Yeah. It was like, as a kid, it was like getting the egg and the chicken and then having to figure out how the two were related.
Did you go ahead?
Oh,
House.
no, please. Oh,
Well,
are we trying to squeeze through a podcast door at the same time?
We are.
Edit this out. I will break your thumbs. I will
After
make it
you.
impossible. I was going to ask how much of an influence the Beatles were in you deciding to go into music.
It was very, very much an influence on me. Thank you for asking, Hal.
You're welcome.
Because it was, well, because I heard Yellow Submarine, like some kids at my grade school did it in like that sort of pantomime grade school talent show way. And that stuck because it was a kid's song, but it wasn't even vaguely educational. And that was really refreshing. And then I heard Help on a GTE commercial and asked my mom, "Who is that band?" And she went, "That's the Beatles." "Same ones at Yellow Submarine?" "Yeah, that's them." "Can we see them in concert?" "Well, no, hon, we can't. But here's the Red Album." It was sort of weird it felt like being friends with a time traveler a little bit because there were these sort of fresh-faced lads from Liverpool and then these crotchety dudes on Anthology 3.
Yeah.
And they were still like messing things up, and that to have that be your introduction to the Beatles of like, oh yeah, they're kind of goof-ups like the rest of us. It was sort of my first insight into what songwriting and sort of song production is like.
I love that that mentality of it, that it's like, yeah, these guys are gonna mess up. They're gonna try recipes that do not work for certain songs. After you could not see them in concert, where did you start? Were you a fan of their earlier rock and roll stuff? Did you like the concept albums? What was your thing?
Well, the Red Album is like that was like a compilation that was put out. It was like 63 to 66 or something.
Yeah, that's them looking over the thing. Little
babies, just singing their teeny bopper songs. And that was, I definitely like danced to those as a kid. I found those danceable in whatever capacity I find anything danceable as the hippest person alive. But it was nice to, the thing about the Beatles that's so interesting is they were active when the album was changing shape anyway. And so they experienced this, to look at all of their albums like I also did this week. It's just a real interesting study. Like their creative growth is so clear. And I think some of that is sort of, they've had sort of the Walt Disney kind of hagiography around them of like these four lads who were the Silver Beatles, and then they were the Beatles, and then they took some drugs and Brian Epstein. Like I know the beats of the Beatles story and project it onto their songs, but also their songs are just kind of bops, notwithstanding.
Yeah. I mean, I think Lennon McCartney, maybe the greatest songwriting team of all time. There's definitely stiff competition, but also I think everybody who listens to the Beatles and is a fan goes through a phase where you like the early stuff first because it is the least complex, and then you sort of grow up with their sound changing with you. But also it could be broken down into which drugs you like to do. So if you're way into speed, you like their early stuff, and then if you're into weed, you like the sort of the middle, and then you get into the harder stuff, and you're moving towards like Magical Mystery Tour and White Album and Sgt. Pepper's and all that kind of stuff.
And is some complexity too complex that you're like, if you like the simpler songs, listen to their early stuff? Is there a cutoff point that the Beatles had that was like, okay, that is the right amount of complex? Oh, they're still okay. Guys, the less, okay, sure.
Number 9, are you sure?
Queens
Number 9?
Chicken. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Lennon McCartney thing, I remember noticing that really quickly because they were always, that was their gist, right? Was that Lennon and McCartney, regardless of who really had authorship of a song, they would be credited as a duo. But then that made me listen out for like, well, what is the McCartney sound and what is the Lennon sound? Because the George Harrison sound very clear and very distinct. And I'm a bit of a George Harris stan myself.
Sure.
Ukulele player, you gotta. But yeah, like listening for what authors, like what does the voice of a songwriter sound like? How is that distinct? Was a big deal for me. I wanted to ask actually what our personal sort of Beatles preferences are. Like we can't do Kill, Fuck, Marry because there's 4 of them, but could we do like Hold, Thrill, Kiss, Kill?
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
Hold, Thrill.
Which Beatle would you hold, thrill, kiss, and kill?
Oh man,
Ken, you can delete some of this part because I'm writing down hold, kill.
You're writing your match paper out like you're Janice.
Yeah. Say when.
I think I would want to hold Ringo.
Yeah.
He seems the cuddliest, although, I mean, now among the things he's known for is now no more autographs, peace and love. Like him telling his fans, quit sending me stuff. I'm not going to sign anything else ever again because I'm
That's
very
what happens
busy.
When the world's sweetest guy snaps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he ends it with peace and love.
Fear the anger of a patient man. Yeah, his Twitter is mostly emojis. Like, sorry about Little Richard. Peace and love. Heart, peace sign.
Oh, I love that about. He's the heart. He's literally the heartbeat of the band.
And he has a whole sequence in the Hard Day's Night movie where he's just sad by the river by himself. Like, who wouldn't want to hold that?
Yeah, a good portion of that movie is Let's Cheer Up Ringo. I mean, that's the entire If I Fell. It's like them chasing him around. It's like, I don't want to play whatever. Peace and love. I don't want to play the drums. I'm not interested anymore. Any drums sent to me will be tossed. I'm warning you with peace and love.
Booger up with the drums, yeah.
The drums. Do you think when he writes those emoji tweets, do you think they take him 30 seconds? Or do you think he spends like 15 minutes plus? Like, what is the right emoji?
Yeah,
He
like
writes
What is the
it
right
out in
3 words?
paragraph and then picks the perfect emoji for the paragraph he just wrote.
he writes a
That comes
full-blown
from his
statement and then uses the corrective thing on the, like where Apple will be like, oh, this word, did you mean to turn into emoji for plain? Like, oh, yes, I did. But and then it just boils it into this tweet bullion.
He only writes in wingdings now. That's his official font for everything.
Wingdings.
A little English. Yeah.
I love
it's just-
wingdings. That's my favorite font.
Any wingdings sent my way will not be tossed.
Everyone that he sits down to record with is like, oh, hang on. All right, let me put it in my computer, change the font. Okay, now we can record.
He signs his checks in wingdings somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, his signature now is just mailbox facing left, mailbox facing right, mailbox facing left with flag up.
Drum with drumsticks. That's our boy.
Yeah,
So we're holding Ringo. Are we deciding this collectively?
yeah.
I wanted to know your personal preferences, but yes, we should get some
Collectively.
consensus as soon as possible.
I mean,
ASAP.
we kill John Lennon,
Yep.
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Too soon?
of the voices in our head telling us to.
Right.
No, entirely too soon. That's horrible.
No, that's too soon.
I don't want to kill any of them. You can't kill a beat. Maybe Pete Best. Not a great drummer.
No, I think that you do kill John. He certainly had he reformed, I used to be cruel to my woman, I beat her and kept her from the things that he loves, but also he beat his woman and kept her from the things that she loved.
True.
I didn't know.
So yeah, so kill John, hold Ringo.
Oh God.
Thrill
got
George?
Thrill George and Kiss Paul.
Real George and Kiss Paul.
Yeah.
Paul's adorable.
Yeah.
That's the cute one.
Okay. I feel centered in this.
Yeah.
I feel we are the qualified people
Great.
Yeah.
to determine the best Beatles album.
Does that mean the episode's over? Did we do it? No, we're
We
talking
did it.
about albums.
Best Beatle. Oh, album. Oh,
I have there are a few that I would put as the top album. I'm curious for me, I want every song to be either like a banger / bop or one that I enjoy listening to. There are some albums that are considered by some to be their top album by like a large group of people that there are tracks on it or a single track that is almost unlistenable to me that throws it off. Because
Will one track make it will one track eliminate that album for you?
their music is so good. It doesn't eliminate it. I mean, they're still all very good. None of them are bad albums, but when they have as many great songs as they do, you could have one that may not have the best song they ever recorded or the most complex song they ever recorded, but is still overall a better album, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Before we tackle which might be the best Beatles albums, what do we think makes a solid album? Certainly the bops to clunkers ratio is important. I think there ought to be sort of a beginning, middle, and end, for lack of but it should be aware of the tonal sort of shift between tracks, like the track listing should be sort of thoughtfully constructed.
Yep.
I'm all for dynamics, whether that is in how you choose which instruments are going to be played on a given track, how you space them out on an album, when you swing for the fences with something crazy like a giant medley on side 2. You know what I mean? Just make it original. That's my thing, is if it doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's original.
Mm-hmm. I think the songs should sound because I mumbled my way into the room and through what I imagine would have been my introduction.
By the way, this is musician Molly Lewis, by the way.
Yeah.
That's me. Because I've made albums that are live albums and I've made albums that are collections of singles, but but making an album is a choice at this point. That's the kind of neat thing about looking at the Beatles' catalog is they presided over a fundamental sort of rethinking of what an album was. Their early stuff was just, they had a couple singles on there and the rest were mostly covers because they just needed to justify filling up the LP sides with something. And by sort of the middle towards the end of their career, the album was sort of an art object. It was sort of an intentional thing that had sort of a train of thought through it, I guess. And now the album is a choice. It's just sort of you don't have to, nobody has to, physical media is not a thing anymore. So there's no limit on what an album, how many songs that contains.
Right.
And yeah, the Beatles, I think that you have to sort of not agree with like how the tracks are ordered, but like there have been a couple that I listened through this week where the album ended and I went, that's it? That's the one you ended on, guys? Like,
Yeah.
there's sort of you should consider like the long form experience of listening to it as well as the individual songs, you know?
And for the time that it was released, the double-sided experience of it. That at some point there's an intermission.
Mm-hmm.
The last song of side 1 doesn't immediately begin side 2.
Yeah. You got to get up and flip that thing over.
Yeah, which is, that's your moment. And then when you sit back down and start the new side, you are rewarded with, here's a new interesting thing.
You're almost making 2 smaller albums in that way.
Like, a little bit.
And they're early albums, and I feel like this may have stopped around Rubber Soul, maybe even Help, maybe even an album or 2 before that was whoever was putting out the album just told them what to do. Like, this is the order they're going at it. They had no control over it because they weren't the Beatles yet. They were a band that was lucky to have an album that then became a huge hit. So then the next thing the record company wants to do is, let's do that again. This is what worked last time. Let's do it again.
Which they were doing all the way up through.
Yeah. And then as they branch out, they have a little more control and there's a little more artistry to it. And by the time you get to Sgt. Pepper, which is really a response to Pet Sounds, it feels a lot of it is like Paul is full on trying to put together something very specific and convincing everybody else to join him.
And they're also, I think, the whole time just throwing spaghetti at the wall, and George Martin is like sweeping it into a pan and then folding it into like braiding it into something legible.
Oh,
yeah.
I'd love to take a look as we go through these albums. I think it would be fun to do it chronologically because you said before, Molly, you know the beats of their career and why certain things sound the way that they do.
Yeah, a little bit. I think that is sort of fun trivia for us, but I think the album should be good freestanding of.
Oh, of course.
You know.
It doesn't just have to be like, well, this is when they were at their peak, so it's their best one. So let's start toward the very beginning. They team up with George Martin in 1962. Ringo's added to the band. Love Me Do's their first single that drops in October of 62. And then Please Please Me, their first album, released February 1963. Where they recorded famously 10 songs in one 13-hour session. That album is the feat that creating that album is something. Mm-hmm. But it's also just it's just their set, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're basically just doing a set and it's being recorded.
Basically. And the live shows they were doing were the rehearsal for this album and no before or after. And there's not like, I don't want to hold cover songs against any musician, but sure. I think if a good album is like an expression of what that band is capable of and what their big artistic statement is, I don't think this is on the leaderboard.
No. Mm-mm. And following that was, are we looking at With the Beatles or Meet the Beatles?
I'm looking at With the Beatles. I'm using BeatlesBible.com as my reference.
That's same.
You're going British version.
Yes. Core catalog.
Yeah. So With the Beatles comes out next. It knocks Please Please Me out of the number 1 slot where it had been for 30 weeks. Beatlemania is in full effect at this point. It was also first album that called them the Fabulous Foursome in the liner notes, thus giving them their nickname of the Fab Four. And it was George Harrison's first song on that album. Again, though,
no, that was a cover, wasn't it?
It's like Leave Me Alone or something. What was the name of it?
Leave Me Alone? The Michael Jackson song? You did it first.
Yeah, you know Leave Me Alone.
Yeah. Don't Bother Me, you mean?
Don't Bother Me. That's it.
Are you my mother?
Yes.
Is my mother reincarnated as you?
Yes. Yes. Who's that guy from That Thing I Like?
Oh, can you imagine being a teenager in 1963 and just bumping Don't Bother Me as loud as you can?
Yeah.
How good that must have felt.
Rolling down the street.
I honestly, but clearly from my misnaming of it, I didn't know this song before listening to this album this week.
Right. I think almost every Beatles album, I think you could almost go from like if the first track doesn't have like a signature. This is one of the few songs that starts with vocals. They go pure vocals before they go to instrumentals. And everything else is either like feedback or a short riff or something. So I think that for me would take this out, even though there are some great early Beatles songs. There's still a lot of covers on this one too.
What is the standout? What's sort of the gem in this sand?
Oh, man.
In your opinion.
In With the Beatles?
Yeah, like what's sort of I don't want to say the justifiable, but what sort of emerges from?
I'll tell you the one that emerges specifically for me, but this might be just specific to me, and that is Till There Was You, because they put a show tune on the album, and I'm a big show tunes fan. So The fact that they did their version of a song from The Music Man.
Their version, that's the key, because some of these are just kind of just basically what Buddy Holly or Chuck Berry or whoever they took the song from.
Just louder.
Yeah, they're doing like, rock karaoke basically. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, I agree. Till There Was You, I think, is the bop.
Yeah. Hey, all right.
Yeah, that is a really good one. I like All My Loving, which is an original by them. And then for a couple, I actually like their Please Mr. Postman. It's not a great, the original's way better, but I do like their version of, there's like a desperation to their young voices, because it was like, we've got nothing left. We haven't learned how to vocally support ourselves at all. So it always feels like, especially John, it feels like he's about to lose his voice.
Yeah.
Every single track he's singing on. And that one, that, please, Mr. Postman, like that just strain on his voice. I dig it. I just dig it.
They're probably smoking like chimneys at this point too.
Oh my God.
60s.
So many cigarettes.
This does feel like pure early rock and roll. Mm-hmm. Just guys who were fans of American rock and roll and just doing their thing. Loud club style, and maybe do you think this is a better version of it, or Please Please Me? Again, Please Please Me is a great feat, but I don't know if it's the best, you know what I mean?
They're different kinds of albums. Like Please Please Me is almost a live album, but without feeding off the live energy of an audience.
Right.
It's a live album plus desperation and containment. Which is a 2020 mood if ever I've heard one.
Desperation and containment. The live album.
Yeah, that's like their one shot. If it doesn't work, there's no guarantee they're going to do anything else. So they sort of go for broke on it, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, but Please Please Me sounds like, some children locked in a garage with some tape recorders. Whereas this sounds more like the Beatles. When I think of the Beatles, it sounds like sort of their style. And it's enhanced by, I think, if you picture a stadium full of young women screaming under every track, then they'd make a little more sense too, I think.
Sure. That's true.
Following that, then we got a bunch of malarkey for a little while. That's Introducing the Beatles, Meet the Beatles, Twist and Shout, the Beatles' second album.
Have you heard of the Beatles yet? Please buy the Beatles. It's the Beatles. Surprise, the Beatles.
Hey, our label has the Beatles too.
The Beatles, did you know?
Beatles Christmas album. Just kidding, it's the same Beatles songs.
The Beatles Christmas album is like the Star Wars Christmas special of rock albums. I'm just going to cut on the record and say it.
Oh, God. Then they got a little cynical after that. In December of 64, Beatles for Sale comes out. Not cynical, but it's fewer love songs. It's,
Are we just glossing over Hard Day's Night?
Hard Day's Night. We're considering it a film soundtrack, but it is great. Like, you know what? I somehow looked past Hard Day's Night incorrectly.
If you want an album that's full, I think this meets the criteria of everything's either a banger or listenable.
A Hard Day's Night?
Yeah, there's no true clunkers. There's like bops and there's songs and then there's clunkers, and this is either bops or songs.
Yeah.
But it is also, I think, more. Mark, do you have the Wikipedia up?
No, I've got. This is just notes that I took.
Beatles Bible doesn't have information on authorship, but I think there are some cover songs on this one as well.
In Hard Day's Night,
I think maybe the U.S. version has Kansas City, Hey 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 on it.
I think so.
Which is a cover, but the British version is I'll be back. You can't do that. That's one of theirs. When I get home, things we said today, I'll cry instead. Anytime at all.
This actually, somehow I don't have this in my notes, but this was one of the things that I did see. A Hard Day's Night is the first album that is all them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it has like some of their signature early songs, as Can't Buy Me Love, Hard Day's Night, obviously, and If I Fell are probably the three best known off of this album, but they're all really like, just when you think the album's going to sort of drop, like I don't think this album has any more in the tank. The next one is good. They are somewhat similar to one another. A lot of the songs feel somewhat similar. Maybe that's a strike against it.
I think so, because I agree. They're all bangers as you are in the moment, but I'm looking at the track list now, having listened to this album yesterday, and I can't remember what some of them sound like. I think because they all sound so similar.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know why I went through like a phase not too far off, somewhat recently, where I just listened to it over and over again. I just had it sort of running because I enjoy it so much. So, but not all of them. I could tell you probably most of them what they sound like. And then the other one, maybe one or two of them I couldn't identify for you, which is not great.
Yeah. It's not a good thing when you look at an album and you go, wait, what's that one?
Which one? Yeah.
Yeah, hang on. So yeah, sorry I missed Hard Day's Night. That is in the middle of Beatlemania. That's 1964. So in the arc of the Beatles, they're at their peak. This is the soundtrack for the movie about the band The Beatles. That's how huge they were at this point. And that was what led to Beatles for Sale after that. You know, even the title, Beatles for Sale.
The youthful veneer has chipped away.
And the 1,000-yard stares that they all have on the album cover.
They've got the bowl cuts. The bowl cuts are in. We're into the Beatles for Sale, Rubber Soul, Revolver era of hair.
Yeah.
And Help. That's in there as well.
Yeah, that's interesting to think. There's sort of musical eras that they go through and also follicular eras. There's a mustache time. There was an after mustache time.
Also a good description for the lockdown that we've all been on. This is a real follicular roller coaster for a lot of people.
Follicular epoch. We're all in.
Yeah, this is it. This is a follicular era, the likes of which may never be seen again. It will be. It'll be seen again.
This is around the same time, too, that the Beatles meet Bob Dylan. They're touring the U.S. in the fall of 1964. It's at this time that Beatles for Sale drops. Then in the U.S., Beatles 65 comes out. We don't need to talk about Beatles 65, right? That's not.
They're both compilation albums.
Yeah, they're exactly. Then the next thing it looks like is the Help soundtrack that comes out. Is that correct? You have in front of you the official canon. Yeah. I just have some hastily typed notes that are all in one font size, which is small.
Yeah. Because one thing I want to just throw, well, it doesn't really matter. Beatles for Sale also had covers because they were touring constantly and didn't have time to write.
So
they kind of backslid into that pattern.
Yeah.
But then Help, they made a movie again. Why?
Guys, calm down.
And this one had a plot. This one was a full-on Ringo's ring. Ringo's got the ring of like a sultan or something, and they have to chop his hand off. Like it won't come off. And he's in love with a girl, and then
he sits in the river and is sad again.
It's a lot of being chased.
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen the movie Help. I only know the soundtrack.
Help is great because it's the one where they have 4 flats, these 4 townhome flats that are all next to each other, and they open the front door, and it opens to reveal it's one big room. Oh, so they all live in one big house together.
Ridiculous.
Just like the Monkees would a year later.
Yeah.
So
this album is it weird to say that? I know that the Monkees were just, the Beatles American TV version, but this album sounds like this is the one that influenced the Monkees. This album is the most Monkeesy sounding to me.
I mean, they were contemporaries. I think that's fair. Like the knock, because I thought this album was pretty good as I was listening through it. But to go back to sort of the point about track listing, this Help has Yesterday on it. Yeah. And then right after that is John going, Miss Lizzie.
Yeah.
Which is such a buzzkill.
It feels like they would end the concert with Yesterday. And then if the crowd wanted one more, they'd throw out Dizzy Miss Lizzie.
Yeah. Here's some slop, you pigs.
Yeah. but this one does have, this has Yesterday on it. The most covered song in history. It's got Ticket to Ride on it. It's got Help. These are.
It's got
I've Just Seen a Face.
That's right.
That's a good one. Is so good. The great songs off of this album are, they all have great songs on it, but they're sort of in my, when I think of early Beatles, I guess I think of the end of the early Beatles.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, there's sound definitely, it changes after this.
This feels like the end of the early rock and roll Beatles with a little bit of experiment happening.
It does have covers on it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Act Naturally, obviously, which was Ringo's pity track, is a cover of Buck Owens, which in turn was a cover of, I can't remember the original person who recorded it, but it was in country music at that time, everybody recorded the same song. Yeah, now I'll have a hit with it. But it was because of Buck Owens at the time and how huge he was, because he was in the middle of, I think, 21 straight #1 hits or something like that he had. Some unprecedented run in country music that the Beatles covering it was a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Not only in recognizing him and the success it gave him, but also it's one of the few, I can't even think of any other country songs that they have on any of their albums. So it has the only sort of Beatles go country kind of song.
Counting Rocky Raccoon? Do you count? It's more of a pastiche, I guess, than like a homage. Yeah.
That's folksy, but not country.
Rocket Raccoon sounds a little more Bakersfield country than Nashville country.
Yeah, there's that accent. Why is he doing that accent?
Yeah. He's making fun of my people. So then big thing happens after Help. The Beatles decide that they're not going to tour anymore. They're going to go in the studio. They're going to take some time off, and they're going to just craft an album. Molly, you might know this. Was this the first time that a band had done something like this? I know this predates Pet Sounds. Like, this was what led to Pet Sounds from Beach
and
Boys.
I'd be hesitant to say that the Beatles were the first to do anything.
Sure.
But they were, very open about their influences and their collaborators, and I think they kind of held up a mirror to what progress was being made. But yeah, they definitely made a statement of like, we are not going to tour and we are going to focus on the album part because that's how we make our money. This is the thing that is creatively enriching for us. And I don't know about these I know the Brian Wilson Beatles back and forth that could be a cast episode itself.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
Also at that time touring, like they couldn't hear, if you took a recording of just what they were playing in one of those concerts, it would sound horrible because they literally couldn't hear one another. Like all you can hear and almost any of their concerts that you watch is just this wall of sound of the fans screaming, most of whom were teenage girls. Mm-hmm. It was just so deafening. They couldn't hear one another. They would sort of mess up and they'd be out of sync. And I think it drove Paul was the one who was like, we should keep touring because we can make a lot of money. But they agreed as a group, like, this is going to ruin our ability to we're not making music anymore. We're just being screamed at for a couple hours every night. We don't want that.
And playing the hits that they've played 5,000 times. It's like doing a show. If you do the same, it's like a Broadway run of a show. You did a giant musical on Broadway for 3,000 performances. By performance 2751, you're probably not thinking about the music all that much while you're playing it. They didn't do that many. They did 1,400 shows before Shea Stadium, which is a ton.
Can you imagine like trying to sing, I Dreamed a Dream or something and everyone is just screaming at you?
Yeah, that's true.
Makes it so God. Tough.
Yeah. So you can only do the musicals that just have big loud songs like that. Forget trying to do a straight play for that long.
Bump.
I mean, that does happen for Hamilton.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that was the one exception.
Yeah. Oh my God.
They had to act through the screams.
It's Ham-mania.
This is, of course, they go in the studio and in December of 1965, they release Rubber Soul. This is where my favorite, of course, I mean, for me, I'm an album because like I said before, I like the originality of the instruments. I like a good arc. I like my stuff theatrical. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I like my music theatrical. Mm-hmm. And this is where that really, really kicks in. And a run that goes all the way up through Sgt. Pepper's of them just crushing these next few albums that they came out with. Mm-hmm. Thoughts on Rubber Soul?
Just looking at the track listing now, I would say there's one, maybe two unbops, like not full-blown clunkers, but like less than stellar. But I'm curious what tracks kind of hold this back from being the greatest, we'll say, of the albums.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have again, it has a couple that aren't great. I wonder if ours are the same. I feel like The Word is one of them that's not so great.
I almost feel like we should have been reading out the track listings as we were going, but if you're following along at home, open up BeatlesBible.com.
Yeah. Or just, if you're a old groover, just go grab that little section out of your record collection.
Pause this, listen to the album, and then come back. Yeah. It'll take 13 hours. Good luck.
I feel like if I was on Sporkle and the quiz was tracks from Rubber Soul, I could do it without looking, with no reference.
Yeah.
Ooh.
This is my favorite Beatles album, and I think it should be a finalist for the reason that it has a ton of bops and a couple of unbops, but nothing unlistenable.
Nothing anti-bop,
Right.
Nothing where it's like, I have to skip it. Like, even the songs that you might not like as much, they're quick and they're over fast. Like, they're not, you don't have to suffer through them. They just sort of pass by. They're kind of like vanilla.
Yeah. Here, try this for a minute. You didn't like this? Okay, here's this one.
Yeah, sort of a poo-poo platter of tunes.
I think with what they're doing with creating an album, I think that they knock it out of the park this has my favorite beginning to a Beatles album ever. Mm-hmm. The first two tracks on this, which is Drive My Car and Norwegian Wood, is here is a banger like you're used to us playing and a really like a great, great rock and roll song. Mm-hmm. And then here's Norwegian Wood. We're going to do something a little different this time.
And I think because of the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, I didn't know Nowhere Man was this early in their timeline.
Oh, yeah.
And Nowhere Man is another kind of, let me try something new on you first. Mm-hmm. I think my only complaint about the track listing of this album is they end on Run for Your Life, which I think is kind of an odd choice because it's, he's threatening a lady, but just a little bit. But yeah, there's the flow from track to track is very good. It tells a complete story.
And it's the introduction of the sitar to their musical arsenal, which I will argue in some upcoming albums gets overused a little bit. It's not for me.
Maybe a little bit.
When did the shift start? Not psychologically, but I guess philosophically, from it being John Lennon and Paul McCartney to the team up, or the at least interpersonal team up, being John and George together and Paul and Ringo?
In terms of singing, or in terms
of in terms of them interpersonally, and how do you guys think that affected it? Because I know that right around now and then a little bit later when they go to India and George and John stay there for longer, because it was right around this time that they were introduced to LSD. And that became specifically a John and George thing to do, where Paul and Ringo tried it some, but do you think there's a musical connection in that? Like, it was when you mentioned the sitar that made me think of it.
Yeah, because they went to India and between
68.
Yeah, before the White Album, basically.
Right. They got into LSD in 65, though.
And George got into Ravi Shankar.
Yeah.
That was him bringing that in. It's interesting to see George has the most interesting arc of any of the Beatles in terms of he's quietly he's actually really good at playing that instrument, to, he's bringing new sounds to the band, to, he's actually a pretty good songwriter, to, when they leave the band, he puts out a triple album because he has so much material that just couldn't fit. It sucks to be George Harrison towards the end of the Beatles because you're one of the best songwriters on the planet, and two of the people who are more acclaimed than you are in the same band. So they're going to get the lion's share of every single album that you record on.
Yeah.
Forget this. I'm going to team up with Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's going to be Rodgers and Hammerstein and no, not that either. All right, fine. I'll go over here with Lerner and Lowe.
Rodgers and Harrison and Hammerstein? Is that more alphabet? No, it's less alphabetical?
No,
it wasn't alphabetical at all? Oh.
Look, I'll join or I won't join. Whatever you want me to do is fine. You're all being crackers. That's my big, that was how I started
for so many years, and I love
an impression of George Harrison is him on MTV talking about something in the late 80s and going, they're all being crackers. Like that. That's the one word for George. That's my George Harrison impression word. Crackers.
Crackers.
Should make a meme out of that. That could prove useful right now.
Have you seen the video of Paul McCartney making mashed potatoes?
Not yet, but what time are we done with this? Cause I'm about to.
Yeah. It was he was a Twitch streamer before that was even a word. It was a live stream to promote Linda's book, and he puts raw onions in it. It's horrifying.
Ooh.
And he's just all these made up words, everything in the kitchen. It's fantastic.
Everything in the kitchen is just the name. It's just what they do.
He describes cutting off the top of an onion as chopping off the toppy bit.
Oh, that's the most adorable thing I've ever heard.
So Uncle Mac.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, this is a great favorite album to have, and I think this is the beginning of the window where we have the candidates for best, but
yeah.
So it's certainly, I think, on the medal stand.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then, of course, after that, they dropped the arguably even better Revolver, which added more of the psychedelia to it, a few more experiments. Another one of my favorite, again, this is the run that I think is just fantastic. Even the album cover of Revolver is so
hand-drawn.
good.
Yeah, I
the
think
hand-drawn cover is so good.
And that's an underrated criteria for a great album, is how good does it look on an LP sleeve. Mm-hmm. I think that's got to factor in.
Because there's that one that's one of those compilation albums was just them in lab coats with a bunch of plastic baby parts.
And ground meat. They were putting ground meat in the meat grinders.
Is that what it was?
There's one where they're just holding the doll parts, which is the tame version. Right. The untamed version is them putting it into the top of a meat grinder and hamburger meat coming out of the bottom. That's
the hair on a Morica version.
Yeah, that is the really expensive, hard to find collector's edition, costs a lot of money version of it.
Has the same songs on it, you guys.
Yeah, it's the same songs.
Also, I have a printer and a CD burner. I'll make you one.
I could make hamburger meat. I don't need the Beatles to do it.
Yeah. I have some frozen hamburger meat in my freezer right now. It's bison, which is way healthier.
I'm going to put this frozen hamburger meat into my vegan wife's mashed potatoes with this raw onion. Hold on. Let me
chop the toppy bit.
Chop off the toppy bit.
So how do you feel about Revolver, Molly? Where do you sit with this one?
It's my personal favorite.
Yeah.
It is, I think, like, bought it with my own money, even though it was the Beatles, so it was everywhere at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know, like, some of the songs I kind of have mixed feelings about, but they're still fun to listen to, Like, Dr. Robert, I wouldn't go out of my way.
Right.
But it also has Eleanor Rigby, it has Yellow Submarine, and Andrew Bird Can Sing is very fun to play in Beatles rock band, so there's a soft spot there.
Sure.
And Taxman. I think Taxman is, it's same with Drive My Car. It's a great way to an album.
Yeah.
They played it. Yeah.
Yes.
They do the same thing with this album, which is start with a killer rock song and then do something completely different with Eleanor Rigby. So it's got a great opening and Tomorrow Never Knows closing it out.
Yeah, which is sort of the Rubber Soul move of like, here's something confusing.
Yeah.
There you go. Put it back in the sleeve.
I don't like Tomorrow Never Knows. I don't like that track. It kind of ruins the whole album for him. Like, this was going so well. And then all of a sudden John's like, now listen to this.
Yeah, George just hovers in on like a cloud of vape smoke. Like, I've got this song.
I've got 900 crackers, sitars that I brought in with me.
There was a detail I forgot to mention that I loved about Rubber Soul was the nickname that John Lennon had for it. Just going back a quick one, because you mentioned him flying in on a cloud of vape smoke. John Lennon referred to Rubber Soul as the pot album.
Yep.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
That's a different,
So it's,
not follicular, not musical, but pharmacological, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was an amusing detail that like, it's officially called the Beatles, but unofficially it's called the White Album. I'm like, okay, well, let's do that with Rubber Soul then.
Yeah. I mean, track for track, this album has better songs. Like its
Than Rubber Soul?
peaks are higher than Rubber Soul's. I think its lows are a little bit lower for me. In that just Rubber Soul gets a little dull. Revolver goes into what's that? What am I listening? What happened to where'd the Beatles go? Why is this? Why?
Yeah. Well, like, and, For No One kind of gets into these sort of vague, like faux theatrical bend they really get into in Sgt. Pepper. Like you start to see them play with like sort of narrative structure in a song a little more. Though it occurred to me as I was listening, I don't know if there's any Beatle lyric that I would have like put on a throw pillow. They're not a lyric forward band necessarily.
No. Well, in their next album, though, they were the first major band ever to put their lyrics in the liner notes with Sgt. Pepper.
Just the difference between 2 albums ago, like the instrumental credits, just all the different parts.
Sure.
Whereas the credits of Sgt. Pepper looks like the phone book.
Of course.
Oh yeah. Well, cause you have Day in the Life, which is like has every instrument ever invented played on it.
700 hours it took to make Sgt. Pepper. Yeah.
Amazing.
Recorded at Abbey Road in November of 66. 700 hours. Which album was the Paul is Dead album?
That's the White Album, I think.
I think so.
Is it the White Album?
There's Turn Me On Dead Man, I think was on the White Album.
Oh, okay.
No, Strawberry Fields was also on Magical Mystery Tour, I believe.
Yes. Right. Maybe that's the one that has Paul is Dead.
There's Paul is Dead Man, Miss Him. There's Turn Me On Dead Man, which is a separate track. That's the other fun thing about getting into the Beatles after the Beatles you can binge the Beatles and any fan theories that suit your taste.
Yes. Yeah, you can find whatever you want.
Yeah, you can find that Paul is Dead is totally true, that Paul is Dead is a hoax. Whatever you're looking for, there is someone out there who agrees with you and has written an article with a heading, so it looks like it's from a publication.
That's right. Sasquatch did play bass on Get Back. You're right.
He is the 19th Beatle.
19th Beatle.
Let's talk a little more about Sgt. Pepper, because this seems like the end of that huge era. This is like as a 1, 2, 3. I think they get better as they go. That's my opinion.
Getting so much better all the time.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know that they get better as a band than Sgt. Pepper.
And I think
Hal's making a face.
Hal,
wait, what are you going to say, Molly? I want to hear.
Oh, no, just that like, comparing to, Please Please Me and with the Beatles, where it's just kind of a collection of nearly identical sounding bops, not all of which are theirs. This, like, Sgt. Pepper almost feels incomplete in segments. Like, it's something, it's just such a complete reversal of what the album was when the Beatles started. And probably a lot of that is they had this exposure and could do whatever they wanted and could collaborate with whomever. But just as an art object, like I think it nails every front. Like the album art is distinct. They thought about the packaging and the experience of actually physically having the album, which I think is important. And I don't know, as tracks go, do you think there are any, not anti-bops perhaps, but any sort of lesser bops?
I mean, I could dance to Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite all day. No, I'm not, that's not really much of a dance tune for me. But again, it's one of those weird ones that I love because it's fun and crazy. Yeah,
like Within You, Without You, maybe it's kind of the Tomorrow Never Knows segment of, okay, George, thanks, and then he hovers away.
Yeah, exactly. He's just full on he has become a vaporous cloud for that one. And so like you have that track is way too George. Like the bad side of George. And then When I'm 64 starts the descent into the bad side of Paul, where like, this is way too saccharine. And now I get, like, you talked about recognizing the different voices of different songwriters. This is where we see Paul, like, this is, especially now in retrospect, the seeds that would lead him to Wings. And you could almost draw a line between When I'm 64 and Wonderful Christmas Time.
I knew you were going to say that.
No, it's true, but it's like that.
You're right. It's
there.
Syrupy, sweet, which I've always loved When I'm 64. But yeah, it is so, if like, Paul needs John to give him balls and John needs Paul to give him heart, this one is no balls.
The sort of the Wizard of Oz analogy. Which one's Dorothy?
Ringo's Dorothy, right?
Yeah.
Ringo's Dorothy. He clicks his heels together 3 times to drop the beat.
No more ruby slippers. Any slippers sent to me will be toast.
Peace and love. There's no place like home.
But I think with this album, they continue their pattern of starting with an absolute slapper and then closing with something confusing. But that confusing thing was A Day in the Life, which is such a sort of paradigm. I mean, it was, reflecting Pet Sounds. It was a Brian Wilson song, basically, that they crowdsourced. But, it sort of shifted I think the public imagination of like what a studio album could be.
Yes. And they were smart to put that at the end. It's definitely, it can be confusing, but there's nothing better than that song on that album. In terms of the achievement, in terms of how dense it is. Just like it's a song in multiple parts.
And I think there's like segments of each Beatle in there. Like there's clearly a George section and a Paul section and a John section. It's sort of this sort of tour of like, here's what the Beatles think they are right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be hard for this not to be a finalist. I just have like those 2 tracks, more Within You, Without You than When I'm 64, which When I'm 64 just feels like it doesn't quite, it's odd to say that song doesn't fit in an album where it's so varying and it's sort of telling its own story and each song has its own personality, that those 2 songs to me don't quite fit. And When I'm 64 fits less than Within You, Without You.
I don't know where else you would put them. Like, I don't know if I have any, you couldn't put Within You. Well, I wish that in BeatlesBible.com they showed where the LP division was, like where side A.
Yeah, I'm wondering that for a lot of these.
Yeah, because if you start side B with Within You, Without You, then you a little bit.
Yeah, I think side A ends with Within You, Without You.
Okay. I think starting, it feels like When I'm 64 is then a little, hey, sorry about that, we're back, we're the Beatles.
Yeah, side 1 ends with,
what did All You Need Is Love come off of?
It was a single.
It was a single.
For a simulcast.
Because I was like, the next big thing they did was All You Need Is Love was that simulcast. And I was like, wait a minute, did I miss something in these notes about which album that came off of? But that was
they wrote it just for that. I think it got
rolled on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, I think.
Yeah, either that or Magical Mystery Tour. I got rolled into one of those albums.
And Lady Madonna was also a single. I didn't know that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I couldn't find what album it was on. It didn't come up.
Oh.
What were you looking up, Hal? Did you find it?
Sorry. Yeah, hold on. I have almost got it. I really want to know what's on each side.
Where Sgt. Pepper's flips?
Yeah. I want to know.
And I don't think
there we go.
I don't know that it adds or subtracts from its overall quality as an album, but it is something that had to factor in when they ordered these tracks that we don't have to consider now.
Why is this one image the lowest quality image possible? I found the fuzziest.
Were you trying to find the actual physical?
I was looking at the back of the first album, which has the 2 sides, but then quickly falls. Every single one Forget it.
Hold on a second. I'm going to see if I can Google faster than you.
Please do.
Google fight.
Google fight. I do have the Wikipedia for the Ballad of John and Yoko, which is another single that does not appear. I think it was added to the White Album later, wasn't it? Or maybe it was added to...
The Ballad of John and Yoko, I thought, was on one of John's. No, that on the White Album? Now I gotta look it up.
Sgt. Pepper's is 2 records.
Oh,
that's right. It was a double album.
So yeah, it went Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band introduces side 1. Good Morning, introduces side 2. Got to Get You Into My Life introduces side 3, and Come Together introduces side 4.
Are we talking about Sgt. Pepper still?
No, that's not Sgt. Pepper.
Hang on a second.
What are you looking at? It ends with being for the benefit. Oh no, side 2. I got it. All right.
You got it.
Started here.
Oh no. Okay.
I'm sorry. I was incorrect. Within You Without You does not end side 1. It begins side 2.
Oh, okay. Wait, so then Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite closes out side 2?
That's the first. Yeah. So side 1 starts with Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
And then ends with Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. It's a single album.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second half starts Within You Without You. And then goes to Day in the Life. And Within You Without You, you cannot open a side with it, nor should you close a side with it. Or should you have put it on the album?
Is one song going to be what Molly was talking about earlier, where it could be the greatest album of all time, if not for the one terrible song?
That was me that said that, and yes.
I thought it was I thought I'm just going to attribute all the good ideas to Molly for this episode.
I don't blame you. I attribute them all to her too. Even if it's not during this recording.
That would be a first.
All good ideas were Molly's idea.
Yeah.
Well, that seems kind of lopsided, because then Sgt. Pepper's and With a Little Help from My Friends and Lucy in the Sky, they're the first 3 tracks. That seems like you're sort of front-loading a lot of your winners, and then you flip it over to Getting Better. Like, that seems... It seems like kind of a steady ramp down until you get to Day in the Life, and then you're confused again.
And also one of those, I mean, Good Morning. I love that song. That's a really good one, which comes after Lovely Rita, which is another very good song. But then you have the reprise. So they come back to their opening song, and then you have Day in the Life. So it is definitely lopsided in that the first half is like a really, really strong start. And then I think there is sort of a downward slope to it when you get to that second half. Not that there aren't great tracks there. And again, it's the Beatles. Nothing sucks.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything it doesn't have to get real great in the middle, and then it doesn't have to all be satisfying, as long as it's a consistent sort of ramp, as long as there's no moment where you're like, Dizzy Miss Lizzie, what the hell? And I think that the She's Leaving Home to Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite is a more jarring transition than anything in and out of Within You Without You, because that song doesn't seem to start or finish necessarily. No. It is one of those, actually, no, not that one. Tomorrow Never Knows from the previous album is, I like to teach it on ukulele because it is technically no chords. It's just the open strum on ukulele. That's how you play that song.
Oh, there,
you can play a Beatles song. I'm a great teacher. But it's a pee break. That's the pee break of the album, you think?
I think you go number 2 and you'd be fine if that song.
Wow.
Because it is, I don't have a track listing in front of me anymore, but I think that song is 55 minutes long. Is that right?
Within You Without You?
Yeah.
How you hating one song so much is really making me happy.
And that's but that is George's one song on the album.
Mm-hmm.
The other song he came up with for that album was Only a Northern Song, which came up later. So we're not in the height of his really good songwriting contributions, but also he didn't really care as much about Sgt. Pepper because he was already I want to go to India. I want to go hang out with Ravi Shankar. I'm not were he here talking to us, I don't think he would hold it in as high reverence because it was just this is Paul's baby.
Though what I'll say, I'm looking at the track listing again for your favorite album, Rubber Soul.
Yes.
And they're all unimpeachable bops, I think. And they're all kind of different in their own way. And there's not a really clear, what the hell was that? And I think the thing about Sgt. Pepper is most of the tracks are what was that?
Which is what I love about it.
Yeah, but not in that White Album way of was that technically a song? They're all still defensively songs.
It's very funny.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, the White Album is a mess.
Yeah.
I enjoy listening to it. I went through a phase with that too. I think when I was in high school where I just would listen to it over and over again and somehow find value in all of it, which is great. Good for me. But now it's hard to listen to it again, especially like the more you know when you learn like they recorded most of that stuff, each of them by themselves. There isn't a lot of like group recording going on. Paul is taking over. Like he's like, I have an idea for a song. I'm just going to do all the parts of it and you guys can fill in stuff later.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump ahead to the White Album and having skipped the Magical Mystery Tour, which we don't need to really.
Are you sure? Are you sure about that?
Wait, what?
Are you sure about skipping Magical Mystery Tour?
Oh, no.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, it sounds like we're done with Sgt. Pepper. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break and we will jump right back in with Molly Lewis in just a moment and talk about some more Beatles. We'll be right back.
I have a tweet that I'd like to read. This is from Morsaphy Jones. I hope I'm saying that right. To MaxFun HQ. And they say, you and your crew's dedication to keep delivering all of my favorite nonsense in this weird time is just the absolute best. It's already helping to save my little food industry turned stay-at-home mom soul. Thank you. So first of all, thank you to any stay-at-home mom in the world, especially during a time like this. Thank you to a food industry worker. So, Morsaphy Jones, thank you. But the reason that I wanted to read this one is I just love the phrase, delivering all my favorite nonsense. Because I think that is what we do best at Max Fun. In a world of all things consequential, it's fun to just to bring someone their favorite nonsense.
We're so lucky to have this podcast right now, to have this nonsense.
Amen.
Not only is it an outlet for us and getting to see you, like doing this over Zoom now, and getting to see your face and see your apartment is so weird because we've recorded there so many times it feels like I'm like, I could just walk through the screen and then I'm right there.
I can smell Jen's cooking in your Zoom call right now.
I made that. But not only do we get to connect with each other, but it does feel like we're helping the community by providing some companionship and maybe giving you a diversion that, especially our show, you don't have to think about anything else. You can just get engaged in whatever weird thing we're debating that week. But even still, it takes time. Now, especially technology and funding to keep producing episodes to share with you. And joining or upgrading enables us to keep doing this instead of other things.
That's right. And if you'd like to help, membership at Max Fun starts at $5 a month. That gives you all the bonus content. You'll be able to access that as long as you're a member. And there's a whole lot of it already waiting for you right now on the Max Fun site. If you choose to join at $10 a month, you get a Max Fun membership card, a cool magnet, and you also get all of the bonus content, of course. And if you join for $20 a month or more, you get this year's special gift, which is a Max Fun game pack featuring a custom dice set and custom deck of playing cards, all with Max Fun designs. Just visit MaximumFun.org/join to become a member.
And don't forget to check We Got This with Mark and Hal. Now, this is super cool. We've never done this before. You can get a subscription for a friend for 1 year so that you can both enjoy the BOCO, that's short for bonus content, and swag. You can gift a subscription to someone you've never even met who had to cancel this year due to COVID, which is really, really great. You'll be paying the BOCO and Max Fun gifts forward to someone who could use a little extra cheer. Just check the anonymous Max Funster box when filling out the online form at MaximumFun.org/join. And again, don't forget to check the box when We Got This with Mark and Hal so we can benefit directly from that contribution.
And a huge thank you to all of our members who have made it possible for us to keep doing this through all of this time. Because of you, we have been able to adapt to remote production. I know it's great to see Hal's face in the same room, but it's almost just as good to see him on here. And we can't thank you enough for giving us this chance. If you're ready to become a member and help support the show, visit MaximumFun.org/join. But for now, let's get back to the show.
And we're back. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
If anything, I was interrupting you.
It was getting very heated about the end of Sgt. Pepper's there.
Yeah, we all took a walk. We got it out of our system.
We all took a walk.
I feel better.
I have bad news for you, though, guys. Unfortunately, while we were off taking our walk, their manager died and things fell into terrible disrepair, and the Beatles stumbled for a little while.
If only we'd been here, we could have saved him.
I know. Let's never let a fight bring us apart again.
The soundtrack of Magical Mystery Tour. They made a movie, Magical Mystery Tour, which was described by critics as a, quote, witless home movie. Yeah. Technically a film, But it did have a successful soundtrack with some good music on it. Let's talk about Magical Mystery Tour.
They shoveled some music spaghetti into our faces.
I don't know what the side A, side B division was on this, but looking at the track listing now, you could probably just skip side A, which is not a great statement.
Mm-hmm. Just
but
listen to side A of Sgt. Pepper and side B of Magical Mystery Tour and you're set.
Just juggle them like chainsaws and put them down in whatever order they fall. It has Eye on the Walrus, which is not great song full stop, but it's a good Beatles song. Yeah. And it's got Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and Baby You're a Rich Man. So it felt worth mentioning those, but it is certainly, those are bops, but it is not overall a collection of bops. I think we can agree.
Yes. Blue Jay Way is weird. Flying is weird. I mean, those alone. Your Mother Should Know again feels like this is somehow less Paul than What I'm 64, but it feels very Paul, even if it's mainly a John song. I'm pretty sure it's a Paul though.
Yeah. It's got that stink.
Again, I don't have the in-depth knowledge, but it seems from a semi-outside perspective that Paul is very earnest and sweet in his songwriting, and the other three members of his band are just assorted drugs at this point.
Yeah, I think Paul McCartney's career as a whole is a lesson in, yeah, why not? You know? So I think that comes through in his songwriting. Why not write a song about piggies? Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I listened to this album this morning and I can't remember what Blue Jay Way or Flying sound like. Mm-hmm. I'm merely an hour away from having listened to it. And what?
Yep. You're fine.
Yeah.
All right.
It's okay that you don't.
So this after Magical Mystery Tour in the fall of 67, that is when we're following winter in February of 68. That's when the whole band famously goes to India and they go and they hang out with Ravi Shankar and they are following Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and John and George stay for I don't know how much longer than Paul and Ringo, who went back early. Then John returns to London, leaves his wife, gets a heroin addiction and a Yoko Ono. That spring, they create their own label, Applecore. Mm-hmm. And then the next big release to come out after that is the White Album. The Yellow Submarine doesn't get released until later, the soundtrack to the movie. They do this bonkers cartoon where they did not even do their own voices. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the White Album comes out. Let's talk about the White Album. We mentioned it a little bit. You mentioned that it is a mess.
It's 31 tracks.
Yeah.
It's 31 tracks.
Yeah.
But some of them are great.
Yeah, I think you could you could unbraid this and have a good album's worth of tracks, and they just kept going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are the standouts, fam? What are the, if only they had put these on a better album, tracks?
I would put Blackbird as a standout.
Yeah.
While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Yep. Absolutely.
Back in the USSR.
Great way to begin.
Great album starter. Yep.
Helter Skelter is a killer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mother Nature's Son. Like, they have a good album's worth of good songs.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of, like, I wouldn't even call them, like, bad with a capital B. Mm-mm. But that rhymes with P and that stands for piggies, you know? Like,
yeah.
That's George. That's
if
George,
there's a capital B, it's bonkers. That's what it would be.
Yeah. He's close though, because I think two of his big ones, he does Piggies, but also While My Guitar Gently Weeps is him, and he has Eric Clapton in to play a solo and steal his wife.
Oh, jeez! Man, rock and roll music. This is a hard dramatic life.
I mean, she left. I don't think he put on a mask and robbed her out of a safe. She has agency as a human, but they were, together, the two of them left George in multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just feel like if you're going to have an album with this many sides, you got to make each flip worth it. And I don't know, after Bungalow Bill, I'm not sure if I would keep going. And then Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey is the title of a song.
And not a Jonathan Colton song.
Right. He's never even covered it. Has he no decency? Doesn't he know his brand? But yeah, and Why Don't We Do It in the Road is almost good, but also it's on the same album as Helter Skelter, so it's almost redundant in terms of the vibe.
They do have very similar thrash rock, thrash your voice, old school rock vibe, but it's too much.
There are some other streaks of sunlight through the clouds. I think that I Will is really nice. I do like Julia. Mm-hmm. I like Martha, My Dear, only because it's a song about his dog. He's singing about his English sheepdog.
Oh, I didn't know that. That makes it even better. Yeah.
Martha's his puppy.
Also, Sexy Sadie, weirdly, is about... No, I made that.
Yeah, that's right. Also about it. That's about the other dog who wound up living with Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton shows up.
Everything.
It's a really small community.
Yeah. And I like, Mother Nature's Son is good. There's good stuff in here. And then you have like Wild Honey Pie where they're just shouting honey pie at you for like, and like they were like, what if the guitars all sounded like that, like that weird kind of effect. I don't like that.
Yeah. And like Sgt. Pepper, they were kind of questioning like, well, what's an album, man? And by this point they were like, what's a song, man?
What even is music?
Right. It's just excessive. It's just the sort of aesthetic of this album is you, we're rich, you know? It's the Guy Fieri of albums.
Wow. I don't know. It doesn't have nearly enough flames on the album cover.
I guess.
Yeah.
But that's his aesthetic. You, I'm rich.
That's fair. Yeah, Penny Lane is a street in Flavortown.
It's in your ear and your eye and your mouth.
And your mouth. And on his beard.
It's a street in your mouth. Hey, man, driving 1965 Mustang down that street in your mouth in Flavortown.
Happiness is a war good.
I'm at Penny Lane to visit a barber who makes the best tamales in all of Liverpool. I'm going to put my sunglasses on the back of my head and go in.
Stop making fun of Guy Fieri. He's awesome.
He is awesome.
All right. So chronologically moving forward, now they release, this is yet another, it seems like, it feels like they're starting to wind down. Yeah. They're doing things like releasing the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, which is an old song anyway. And then they put a few, reissue tracks on it, some older stuff. Did they actually write anything new for the Yellow Submarine album? Do we know? But it's not like one of their albums.
All the George Martin instrumentals.
Right. The second half of the album it's like when you buy a soundtrack, and it's just, you get, the first half of it is the songs from the Disney movie and the second half is Hans Zimmer.
Mm-hmm. The Beatles wrote 4 new songs for this album. And also, I just found this out. It came out 2 weeks after the White Album came out. I don't know what they were thinking. What?
Come on, guys.
I guess they were like, sorry, here's an actual album. We didn't mean it.
You'll buy it. It's
then.
Fine.
They could have called it This One's Songs. And then after that, the Swan Song. I mean, I'm sorry. Do we need to talk about the Yellow Submarine soundtrack anymore?
It's a soundtrack. I don't know if a soundtrack is a kind of album, but that's not really the topic, I don't think.
But Help was up there. I think all of that George Martin stuff would disqualify this as an album not in the way that Help is not.
I would agree, yeah.
They kind of squeezed this one out. So they were trying to work on Magical Mystery Tour, which was a TV special, but they were under contract from United Artists to make another movie. So the compromise was, you get actors to play us, we will do songs for it, and then we'll film a short sequence at the end that we'll control. They might as well call this like Yellow Contractual Obligations of the album. Because that's really that's them like fulfilling, like, all right, are we good? George wrote this song we didn't use for Sgt. Pepper's. You want only another song on here? You want All You Need Is Love? We'll throw that on there too.
We're all stuck in a contractual obligation. Can't get out of our contract. Oops, breach of contract.
Oh my God. So then the real Swan Song, even though Let It Be came out afterwards, but final.
Can we switch these? Can we talk about Let It Be first? Because it's not the last album they recorded.
Sure.
Yeah. That's fair.
It was the last one released. So this is another concept from Paul, which is we're going to do a live concert, but we'll make a documentary about the making of this album and the first time anybody will hear it is when we do it live. Of course, they get into huge, horrible fights with each other. They were already drifting apart. The Paul and George arguing during The Two of Us is one of my favorites, where Paul doesn't like what George is playing. And George is like, I'll play if you want me to play, or I won't play at all. Whatever, I'm not trying. And then Paul's like, you think I'm trying to get you? I'm not trying to get you. Like, you can tell that as soon as they called cut, the two of them were full haymakers in each other's faces.
Ugh. It's so sad. I just like the version where they all get along.
But it became a documentary. The film's it's a documentary about the breaking up of the Beatles. And then the soundtrack came out in 1970, but the band had already broken up at that point. They were already done.
Right. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. As an album, it's got some of their most recognizable later hits.
And then Maggie May.
And you got Maggie May on there. is
And
also
one
on
after
there.
9 and 9.
Yeah, that's on there. For Your
in
Blue
there.
is on there, which is pretty nice. It's a fun one. Little slide guitar for you.
Yeah, and Billy Preston on the keys on Get Back.
Yeah.
And The Long and Winding Road, where they're all like, we're done, right? We're done with this. Everybody knows we're done. We're 2 songs away from being done forever.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
Is that song, basically.
Yeah.
But the Phil Spector wall of sound on it makes it really, I'm a Let It Be Naked guy where it's underproduced and it's just the 4 of them.
Yep.
So much better than like Phil Spector be like, I know what this needs. A ton of instruments, real loud everywhere, backing everything up all the time.
I don't mind the Phil Spector-ness of it. I mean, I don't like Phil Spector. I'm going to say that out loud.
That's a spicy take.
Look, I don't mean to be the one person with the hot take on Phil Spector, but I like the wall of sound. I think he was so iconic and they were so iconic that like the mix of the 2 of them is at least interesting and worth a listen.
It's weird that that's not the last song on the album. It's the 3rd from last. If you were to, I mean, hopefully nobody ever quizzes me like, what's the track listing of this Beatles album, bruh?
Right.
But I certainly would have put Get Back earlier in. That's the last like published song from Beatles is.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Cause like Let It Be is unimpeachable across the universe, but clearly because the band was breaking up, their individual voices are really way more distinct. There's not as much, it's not like When I'm 64 level siloing of the styles, but it just sort of feels like a sneak preview of what their solo careers are gonna be rather than a Beatles album, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How much of it was Spector? I thought Spector was the whole album. Was it just?
No, he's not on not every track has that wall of sound to it, but they're probably the biggest one is Long and Winding Road.
But he was the producer for the whole album, right?
He and Martin are credited together.
Yeah.
So it may be kind of a Lennon
Martin was
McCartney
still
vibe.
doing it. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Or Martin sitting in the corner while Phil goes, I know what I'm doing. And he's like, man. Yeah.
He's just playing Cat's Cradle by himself.
Right.
Yeah. He was invited to work on the project by Lennon and Harrison without the knowledge of Paul or George Martin. And so Paul, and Glenn Johns, who produced some of their stuff, also doesn't like it. So it's really, his involvement in it alone is divisive among the Beatles and their production crew, not to mention the fans who feel one way. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just prefer, the 4 of them are outstanding musicians. And when you add too much to that, it becomes a hat on a hat.
Right.
And Phil Spector as a producer, I respect the wall of sound. I like it in some places, but with the Beatles, it felt, especially hearing the first time I listened to Let It Be Naked, it was like, oh, that's
what that should
the
have
way
been.
it should sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also they had their own kind of wall of sound anyway from years back, and from Rubber Soul through Sgt. Pepper. It wasn't necessarily novel for them to have horns and strings and glockenspiels and insane things. Maybe not 10 drummers at once, the way the Wall of Sound was, but unique instrumentation didn't start with the Beatles at Phil Spector.
Yeah, and it's not, if they're gonna have a Wall of Sound on this album, I would have wished it on Across the Universe or I Me Mine or something.
Right.
Like the Long and Winding Road on this version, not the Let It Be Naked version, sounds like an old folks home. I don't know if that's just my modern association, but it's just it just feels like sliding into a hot bath. Just kind of waiting to die. I don't know. Cause when was the rooftop concert in their timeline?
The rooftop concert was January 30th, 1969.
Oh, it was in 69.
They were practicing together to see if they wanted to go back out on the road again because Paul wanted to go and play live again. But they did that show on the rooftop and it turned out to be their last.
But that was during the production cycle for this album.
Yeah.
That was what began the production cycle for this. January 30th, 69 was that performance. And in February, they started the sessions for this album.
This in the running to be the best, do we think? Or is it?
Let It Be?
Yeah. Because I want to know what Dig It adds to the calculus. Just the presence of Dig It.
I don't even know Dig It. Which one is Dig It?
It's just kind of like a rolling stone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've listened to so many Beatles songs in the last week and a half.
Yeah. They're just messing around in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just in a boat on a river with tangerine trees.
Marmalade Skies?
I'll say this. If we're going to put one of their swan songs up against their prime, I think the swan song that's going to go up against their prime is not Let It Be. It's going to be Abbey Road.
I would agree with that.
I agree. I'm going to close this tab. We're not going to talk about it anymore. I'm calling it. Case closed.
All right, so let's talk about Abbey Road. You mentioned before that this was Let It Be felt like a prequel to their individual solo careers. Do you think that started with this? Well, this was recorded after, right?
This is their let's do one more. Let's not have that be the last thing we do. And let's bring in Billy Preston so that we behave better because we all like him.
Yeah, and I guess there was confusion about whether or not Billy Preston was going to join the band. That Paul was concerned. Like, why did George bring this dude? I'm confused. But Octopus's Garden is on here. Ringo gets his Ringo.
Hey, all right.
I don't know.
I'm confused though about the order of these. How did this go again? Let It Be was recorded first and then Abbey Road was recorded, but Let It Be came out after, or Let It?
Yes, because it was tied to the film.
Tied to the documentary.
It's essentially a soundtrack to the film.
Gotcha.
So they broke up and then that comes out around the time they broke up
They broke up in December, I guess, and they announced it in April.
This album was the last one. I always consider this to be the end of their time together, and it has fittingly the best ending of any of their albums with a song called The End, which is a really fun, it feels like their last jam together. And then the little coda of Paul doing Her Majesty is so sweet. It's sort of his that's all folks. That's him peeking out at the very end.
Yeah, that's a very charitable way to think about it, and I accept it.
Wait, what's your way?
Oh, I mean, just Paul just wanting attention. That seems to be
be true too.
Not in the way that John wants attention, but he's got kind of he wants to be sort of little Uncle Bass. But also, if I didn't find Her Majesty so endearing, I would find its placement on the album more irritating.
Yeah.
Yes.
This album I love. I love Abbey Road because the first side of this album, every song I think is perfect. Even Maxwell Silverhammer.
Especially Maxwell Silverhammer.
Right. Which is a crazy one. But I mean, Come Together, Something. I mean, this is the two best George songs, I think, are on this album. And then side 2, you get Paul's Crazy Medley.
Well, all of that. It's their unfinished symphony of songs.
Is what, side 2? Or it's all of their...
You Never Give Me Your Money all the way through the end. Are these bits of songs that they weave together. Is there any song in that run that you want to hear the full version of?
I don't think so.
I think Mean Mr. Mustard, if that's in, it has the most, it's the most interesting, because there's definitely on Let It Be, there are also, I don't know, One After 909, kind of just toss it off.
Yeah.
But these have at least some they leave some sort of flavor in your mouth that's not ugh, why? Why'd you make me listen to that?
And it has the feel of Sgt. Pepper's and that, oh, this is weird. It does sort of tell a story. It's a second half, a little bit of a concept to it. And then there's weird stuff like Sun King where you're like, wait, what?
I was just going to say Sun King, if you do want to listen to the entire version of a song, I hear Sun King is 16 hours long and the chords change twice and it just goes. And there's someone spinning a stick in a bowl for about 3 of those hours.
Very easy to teach on ukulele, though.
Yeah. Side A of Abbey Road is pretty perfect, I think.
It's a great sort of album to close out their career, because I think Golden Slumbers up to the end is you could end on Golden Slumbers and then they don't. You could end on Carry That Weight and then they don't. And then you could end on the end and then they don't.
Yeah.
It kind of knew, come out, take a bow. Okay, run backstage, come back, take a bow.
Yeah. I don't know. More thoughts
on? Does it feel like it could be a finalist, or is Sun King so difficult that it's I can't even?
It's kind of hard to measure the bops to clunkers ratio on these later albums,
right? Because they're so weird.
And I feel like there are fewer memorable, when you think of the Beatles, you think of these songs kind of songs, but they were also. I think George Martin had figured out how, what treat he needed to dangle to get them to do what he wanted.
Right.
They were just kind of more cohesive as a band, even as they were breaking up. So, I don't know if I would, if I saw You Never Gave Me Your Money in a karaoke list, I'd never pick it out.
No.
I don't know the words to most of these, but they're still good. It's just, they're not, it doesn't feel like this collection of songs is as outstanding as some of the, Rubber Soul to Sgt. Pepper kind of period.
Yeah.
Which I think is my window for sort of the top contenders.
I think that, yeah, as you put it before, if the Olympic podium, I think the Olympic podium is that sweet spot. It's those 3 albums in a row.
Oh, wow.
Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper.
So those are our finalists?
And how many tracks are on Abbey Road? I'm looking at it now and it's like 15 or 16 maybe?
Are you looking at a super deluxe
I might
edition?
be. I have no idea. It just seems like a lot.
It is really hard I wish I had just the vinyls in front of me, because you go online to try and find like track lists and all of these,
Also,
like the details about it. And there's like, oh, do you want the 1993 super mega deluxe version? Or do you want the 1994 one where they added another 9 songs to that one? You're like, holy crap, guys.
It's 17 tracks if you include Her Majesty as a full track. And then the second half is really like one long medley. So it doesn't feel like as many tracks as it is. I know at some points it might, but.
Yeah. I was appreciating, before we move on, John gets a credit for White Noise Generator, which seems like kind of a cop-out, and Ringo gets a credit for Anvil. So everybody played their part.
Hey, all right. 3 days of recording for that one song. There's some funny quotes of Ringo complaining about that very Anvil.
I was going to say, they must have been so pissed off at Paul because he's such a perfectionist in terms of like, and that was why, I think he would go in and re-record their bits if he didn't like the way they did it. He would chop the toppy bit off of whatever they did and then insert his own.
Yeah.
It's just hitting an anvil with a hammer.
You got the flounce on the anvil.
How are you doing it better?
Look, I'm not trying to get you. You think I'm trying to get you? Look, I'll play the anvil or I won't.
Paul doesn't have a theoretical training. He can't, when I was teaching myself instruments, I was like, well, Paul McCartney can't. He doesn't know music theory. I don't need to either. But in working in studio environments with other musicians, I now recognize how frustrating that is. Like, when you can't articulate what you're trying to hear. And so, yeah, Paul must have been a nightmare.
Oh. Yeah. And then we'll do a little fiddly bit here.
Do a little plunker on the plunker.
I've seen him teach, I think it was on the last album he did on, My Ever Present Past. It's a YouTube video that they made with him where he's teaching people like how to play bass, which is kind of neat. And he knows some of it, but then he's like, sometimes I'll do a little fiddly bit. Then he won't. There's no it's not like I'm playing an arpeggio or I'm doing like whatever he's doing. It's just a fiddly bit. That's it. He's chopping the toppy bit off. It's
do
the
a little
same.
noodly on the doodle.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it worked.
Yeah, I just pick up my low box and grab the skinny part.
Make the bubble parts will go bloom.
So we have our 3 finalists.
Yes.
Based on our conversation, it sounds like one of those rose to the top just in the course of our conversation. In listening to it, just seeing what everybody got excited by, it seemed like there was one that was the most exciting of them.
I don't remember back that far. Which one was it? I'm so excited to hear the reveal.
What's time anymore?
Well, the one that everybody seemed the most excited about was Revolver.
Oh yeah.
That could have just been that, Hal, you were sitting and waiting to be contrarian about Sgt. Pepper because of the one song you hate.
No, because I spent a lot of time talking about how much I dislike Tomorrow Never Knows. So
that's
true. Definitely engaged for that portion of it. Oh man, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that, Molly? What is your gut reaction to Mark saying that right now?
To saying that Revolver is the best Beatles album?
I'm just saying. All I said was that Revolver was the one that seemed to perk everybody up the most.
It kind of feels like these 3 sit in like a Venn diagram a little bit. Like Rubber Soul is a solid rock album. And Sgt. Pepper is a solid studio album, and it feels like Revolver manages to straddle. It's that sort of watershed in the Beatles timeline where they became a studio band more than a rock band. And then like Let It Be and Abbey Road are them trying to figure out how rock works again, but they'll slowly turn into dads in front of everybody's eyes and they can't remember what, they can't get that verve back. But yeah, it feels like Revolver was certainly that turning point for them and therefore the industry. I don't know why I made that voice.
You seem like you were representing the industry.
That's my authority voice.
Yeah. It was really good. It was almost
you can tell by my accent that I'm smart.
You were like a chair turned around with cigar smoke puffing out.
Oh, I didn't see you there. You want to know about the Beatles?
I'll just hear from a song down to try and figure out the best Beatles album. That sure is a gigantic desk. Yeah.
20 years ago today.
Well, let's look at the track list of those again, because maybe that will be something that will, unless you guys agree that seems like the one that
I think putting aside, I'm trying to put aside, Revolver is my personal favorite. And I know, Mark, you haven't mentioned, what is your personal favorite Beatles?
I love that run right there. I was not really introduced to the Beatles as an album band. I spent my entire life up until my mid 30s just listening to individual Beatles songs. Mm-hmm. And, like, what's the best Beatles album? Oh, the red one with the big yellow one on it. Cause that's got all the songs.
Yeah. Oh, the Cirque du Soleil soundtrack. One.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the Beatles love. It was living with my roommate Katie in New York. She had all of the Beatles albums on vinyl. So the original, it was her dad's collection and he gave her. And I had brought a record player when we moved in together. And she was like, oh my gosh, my dad has a ton of old records. I'll get him to send them to us. So these Beatles albums, I'm newer to this, but we didn't have the super early stuff. I do think we had Meet the Beatles was the earliest one. I don't think we had Please Please Me. But the ones I kept picking up and putting on and playing were Rubber Soul and Revolver, were the two that I enjoyed the most. And side A, honestly, of Abbey Road. And then the time would come to flip the record over and I'd go, do I want to flip the record over? Or do I want to put Rubber Soul or Revolver on? Because I listened to my favorite part of Abbey Road already. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my relationship with these albums.
That's a great criteria for a good album is you can put it on no matter what you're doing and listen to the whole thing, start to finish. Like Sgt. Pepper feels more like a lay down on the floor with headphones and listen to the whole thing. And ever looked at your hands, man, like that kind of experience.
You have to make it as an appointment album. Like we're all going to sit down and do this.
Yeah, some movies you put on it's just like a roommate in your house. You put it on while you're cleaning. Right. It's just the soundtrack to your time. Yeah. And then some movies you sit down and watch with both eyeballs.
Yeah, and Rubber Soul felt like, it's funny you mentioned Rubber Soul as a rock album and Sgt. Pepper's a concept album and Revolver's in the middle, because Rubber Soul would be the one like, well, it doesn't need much of my attention.
Right. Good point.
But Revolver would get a little more of my attention.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to what is the criterion of a good album? Like, is it that it's supposed to be a self-encapsulated thing that's like a movie that you can't break apart into scenes, or is it a collection of good scenes,
I think it's both.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think it's like you mentioned the Venn diagram that you want, and all three of these albums do that, where it's a point in their career where they're informed by all of their early work, but also doing interesting stuff like in their later work. It's like, not to reference an old episode, but it's the reason that Groundhog Day won as best Bill Murray movie, because it had enough of young Bill Murray being charming and snarky and also a little bit of him as a wiser, older person. And I think that all three of these albums have that. I don't know. What do you think?
I think if I had to pick one of these three, I think Molly kind of nailed it. The only one that's really a movie, right, is Sgt. Pepper.
Right.
Where they sat down and went, we are going to tell you a story through this album. And if you listen to it any other way, it's not going to work for you. Mm-hmm. So to me, there's a difference between album and concept album, where concept album has parts where you might skip it otherwise, but because it's part of the story, you kind of sit and listen to it and accept it wherever it lies, even if it starts the second side and is just not great. But I think in terms of the story of the band overall, what Revolver represents in terms of switching from, all right, we've perfected the rock part of this and sort of what our voice is. Now we're going to change it and go in new and interesting directions, might make it the best album of all of them.
I agree completely. I think Sgt. Pepper is a concept album that happened to have some chartable hits, but that it is still a concept album. Whereas Revolver and Rubber Soul are both containers of good songs, but the statement that Revolver makes is a lot stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has that groovy cover art.
It does got that groovy cover art, which we cannot discount.
Yeah.
They have spaghetti hair.
Like the physical album itself, the thing that you hold in your hands is the best, whether or not you put a needle on it.
It sounds good and it looks good. Looks good on the shelf.
And it tastes great.
Makes you look smart and cultured, but not a weirdo. And that's the main statement.
Exactly.
You got to disclaim.
I buy paintings based on which rooms they go with.
Yeah.
Listen, you got to launder your personality in the items you buy. Everybody knows this. The
Yeah.
Beatles knew this the best.
Have we figured it out?
Yeah.
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 All right.
Gold medal to
All right.
Revolver. Silver to Rubber Soul, I think.
Yeah, and bronze medal
Bronze.
to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. Hal, if you will, stand up on the dais and proclaim.
Okay. People of the world. Let me tell you how it will be. Revolver is their best LP. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to do it there because I came up with a good rhyming couplet.
Yeah.
Let it sit.
Yeah.
Go out on top like Seinfeld.
That's right. It's their best album. I was not expecting this coming in. I was ready to sort of go to the mat for Rubber Soul, but Molly nailed it in a way that only a professional musician can, which is to help, like, well, my understanding is like, me like this album at best. But I think you pointed out rightly that this is a huge stepping stone, that if you were to remove this album from their canon, you would go, how did they get from Rubber Soul to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club? And it's maybe the only album. You could take out almost any other album, maybe with the exception of Sgt. Pepper itself, and you can see the line. If Rubber Soul didn't exist, you might be able to get to Revolver from Help. You have a better shot. That's like less of a gap to hop over.
Yeah.
But this is kind of the keystone of their entire journey as a band.
The sort of battle of Yavin, how you divide Beatles time.
Yes, this is the battle. This is the battle of Yavin of Beatles albums.
Here in the year 30 BY, or no, 30 RRSJP, however many letters are in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Used to chuff up the toffee bit in my T16 back home.
Oh my God.
That's the best album. Asked and answered. That's it.
Molly, thank you so much for being here. This is very exciting. Molly, you're also responsible for, as a history nerd and a medley nerd, my favorite medley of all time, which is your Lincoln medley.
Well, thank you. I thought you were going to say Fingertips by the MFP Giants, which I was going to take credit for. But thank you.
No, I love that medley. I encourage all of the listeners out there to listen to all of Molly's music. She's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, where can they go to listen to your music and just to learn more about you in a safely distant way?
They can go to a website, which is mollylewis.wtf, and whichever internet appendage I have that is active, that'll point to it.
That's so, I didn't know you could get that as a, what do they call them? Dot threes?
The TLDs or whatever they're called. Yeah, like, actually with the producer of this podcast, Ken Plume, we have a project called Song Along, which is a songwriting competition, and that is songalong.wtf. So they're just cheaper than .com. I don't know why.
Right?
Oh.
Well,
so good.
Thank you for being here. This was a lot of fun. This topic is closed, but there are many more topics to discuss. So please reach out to us on Twitter at We Got This Tweets. Check out the Maximum Fun subreddit, or
email us at wegotThisPodcast@gmail.com, or go to the Facebook group. Talk about why you love the Beatles, your favorite albums, your favorite songs, and so forth and so on. Facebook.com/groups/We Got This Podcast. I did remember it. That's where you go for that.
You've said that over 270 something
At
times.
a certain point, look, I've been inside for 3 months. Thank you to producer Ken Bloom, researcher Kate McManus, graphic designer Uri Kilman, and QA engineer Jen Alba.
And thanks, of course, to our musicians, Jonathan Dinerstein and Mike Furman, for our score and theme song, respectively. And thanks to you, the people of the world, for giving us a chance to sit down with Molly and talk about the Beatles. We love you all dearly. And as a great band once taught us, all you need is love. For Hal Lublin, I'm Mark Gagliardi.
For Mark Gagliardi, I'm Hal Lublin. And don't worry, everybody.
We got this.
We got this.
Yay!
To everyone who listens to this show, we want to thank you so much for being part of the show's community. And if you've taken that extra step to join as a Max Fun member, thank you for making this show possible. And please know how grateful we are for your support, how much it means to us, how much it's meant to us over the years, the things it's allowed us to do that we've gone into in so much detail before. But right now, especially, it's helping us to figure out and find ways to bring you the same show, maybe even dumber, during a very weird time.
And before we sign off here at the end of the Max Fun Drive, 3 quick things. 1, if you haven't had a chance to become a member yet, you can do so at MaximumFun.org/join. I know you've heard us say that a bunch. 2, you've also heard us say this. Don't forget to check the little box that says "We Got This" with Mark and Hal. That's how the good folks at Max Fun know that you'd like at least a portion of your contribution to come to us. And 3, thank you. Thank you for being here with us for these past 5 years of doing the show. Thank you for your support of the Max Fun Network, for listening to the show, for being part of this community, and for helping all of us get through these weird times together. So on behalf of Hal Lublin, I'm Mark Gagliardi.
And for Mark Gagliardi, I'm Hal Lublin. And on behalf of We Got This, thank you.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned.
Audience supported.